Today we are here for AST 10, discussion of AST 10. So this is the first test on tribes. So AST 10, 11, 12, all the three deal with tribes. This is the first test on tribes. We'll discuss 11 and 12 in the next week and wind up tribes. When it comes to tribes, how do you prepare? First, I'll give you a brief overview of tribes and then we'll go into the details of questions. So tribes, it is the easiest, if you ask me, it is the easiest and scoring part of the entire syllabus. It is easy, not just easy, it is also scoring. Even in the recent exam, questions on tribes were very predictable and repetitive questions. But the only thing that you must keep in mind is that for tribes, you have to, just like the other discussion in paper 2 so far, develop a framework or structure for every topic. Because unlike paper 1, you can't really memorize things and go. You can't memorize point by point and go. Depending on the question, you should be able to modify the content. So you should have a framework or structure and you should broadly prepare various themes. You can't prepare topics by itself because topics by themselves are not immediately asked in the examination. But instead, themes get repeated. Themes get repeated. So the idea is to prepare in terms of certain common or important themes. And the answer must have a logical framework which addresses multiple dimensions. It must be able to address multiple dimensions and try to include case studies or examples wherever possible. And on top of it, data, some data, thinkers, Indian thinkers here. And a lot of you are not including this committee report. This has to be your primary source to get all the information on tribes. I'm surprised why many students have left out Kaka committee. This must be a primary source to get your information, get data, get examples. And this committee's recommendations or the committee's suggestions must be used in your answers. I find it very surprising why very few students use them, and even those who mentioned this committee did not discuss that committee in the, did not give it as much importance as it deserves. It's like just mentioned in the passing without really delving into the substantive recommendations of the committee. So please study this. And other committees, for example, if you are preparing health. For health, more recently there has been another committee called the Abhay Bang committee. So you can see what this committee had said. You need not read the entire committee report page to page, cover to cover, but take this committee and identify the key recommendations of this committee. That should do the job. So think of all of this in this framework or in this dimension, please. Now coming to the first question. In fact, a lot of you will automatically find your content boosted if you can cover this committee. You did not read the entire committee. Kaka committee is good for tribal problems. For tribal problems, it is good. Each problem has been dealt in a lot, and within tribal problems, for each problem, just study what is his reasoning and what are his solutions. Because there is no other authoritative text on these issues as of now except this committee report. We don't read Nadeem Hasnan and write this and assume that will be right. Nadeem Hasnan's content is very, very outdated. Kaka committee report is the latest content that we have on this issue. So please take the committee seriously and use the reasoning, use the causes, and discuss the solutions that he had mentioned there. Next, the first topic is economic and regional classification. This is a very easy topic. Most of you wrote this well, but I just have some suggestions of how you can do it better. The good part is, for economic classification, most of you relied on D.N. Mazumdar's classification, but I think that is a little old. Instead, you can rely on L.P. Vidyarthi's classification. That's more reliable economic classification. In fact, L.P. Vidyarthi's economic classification is also a PYQ. 3 years back, they had asked Vidyarthi's economic classification as a question, which means if you have to choose one thinker's economic classification, even UPSC in the previous papers they have acknowledged L.P. Vidyarthi. So please use L.P. Vidyarthi's economic classification, and for regional classification you can use Guha. So B.S. Guha said we can break down geographically. Indian tribes can be broken down into north, northeastern, to central and middle zone, and third southern zone. He gave these three. On top of this, what he misses is a fourth zone, that is the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. So just write this, and more importantly, examples please, examples for each. In fact, a better way of representing all of this is to draw a map. Draw a map and show them. If you can draw a map, it will give better impact. When it comes to economic classification, you can use L.P. Vidyarthi and Rai. I shared a handout on this on the test series group. You can refer to the handout where I discuss this in detail. So he gives 7-fold classification of tribes, that is hunting, hill cultivation, and then pastoral, plain agriculture, simple artisans, I think simple artisan, yes, simple artisan, folk artists, lastly agricultural laborers. So these are the 7 classification, and discuss each with corresponding examples. The handout I gave has numerous examples. That's it, very easy. And if you have the scope, you can discuss the economic challenges. In fact, in the handout I also included that. Discuss the economic challenges or livelihood issues which these communities are facing, and close the discussion. That's it. Next is socio-economic characteristics of shifting cultivars. So this is a very good question, because you have to learn to link your content from paper 1 with your content from paper 2. And in paper 1, in economic anthropology, we have a topic called horticulture. So you should be able to link your content from horticulture with shifting cultivators here. A lot of you wrote very general points here. So define and discuss features of horticulture or shifting cultivation, as we call it, and then define and discuss characteristics, and then under features you list, for example, they are seasonal nomadic, very minimal inequalities. So all these features you discuss in paper 1. Their population size is small, population density is also small, and no specialization, no surplus. Specialization, surplus is not much. Trade is also very, very minimal. Food shortages are quite absent. So and they may have some kind of part-time political officials. Discuss those and then discuss examples and give a lot of Indian examples. Garo, Chakma, Naga, Baiga, Mailer, Hilkaria, Maria Gon, Koya, Konda Reddy, and also discuss the Indian names. Podu, Jum cultivation, and so on. And then discuss this is where you missed. Discuss the challenges that are being faced by shifting cultivation as a way of life. That is, because of the ecological considerations, this kind of life is being discouraged, and many tribals are being asked to shift away from this kind of hill cultivation to permanent agriculture. And there you can conclude with a case study that I shared. So on the group I shared a case study how among the Riang tribe in Tripura, shifting cultivation has been turned into a self-sufficient and economically sustainable practice. So there, by doing some small changes such as increasing the gap between two cycles in which the same land is cultivated, by reducing the population density, and by taking some ecological measures, they have reduced the negative footprint of shifting cultivation, and they have converted this into economically sustainable practice. So you can discuss that case study and say shifting cultivation, if we can do certain reforms as has been done in the Riang tribe in Tripura, so use the Riang tribe case study. If you can do such interventions, then it can be economically feasible while also preserving the traditional tribal culture. That's it. Next is tribal health problems. First, please discuss some data. A lot of you missed data. You will get this data again from Kaka committee. Basic data you can use like life expectancy. So life expectancy is lower. Life expectancy at birth in tribes is 61, and IMR is also low. It is 88. IMR is high. IMR is high. Under 5 mortality rate is high. It is 129. Sex ratio is good. Sex ratio, they are doing better than rest of the country with 990. Underweight is also high, 52%. Stunting is 55%. So these are some data. Discuss the data and discuss the reasons or health challenges in tribes. You'll have different health challenges. And here again, this is discussed very extensively in Kaka committee. In the report, the committee has discussed very extensively different challenges, such as first is low life expectancy, second poor health infrastructure, then social determinants of health are very poor. What are social determinants of health? Sanitation, food, clean drinking water. Health infra can include PHC, doctors, equipment. All of this is very, very bad. Then they have high incidence of communicable diseases because of the conditions in which they live. High incidence of high IMR, MMR. Why? Because of crude birth practices. 6. They also have high incidence of genetic diseases. High incidence of genetic diseases because of inbreeding and cross cousin marriages and all that. Next, we are also seeing emergence of tribal specific diseases like sickle cell anemia, fluorosis, animal bites, falls from trees, and so on. Then we also are seeing addiction to alcohol, tobacco, drugs recently, and emerging threats. What are emerging threats? Climate change, pollution. Of course, we forgot the most important, malnutrition, because of poor access to food and because of the destruction of their traditional habitats. So malnutrition is another major health problem. So discuss all of this and then discuss the recommendations or suggestions as per Kaka committee. So whenever you take any tribal problem like health, education, which is the next question, 7th question, you have to learn to discuss this in terms of what are the administrative concerns, what are the problems because of administrative issues, and what are the issues that are arising because of cultural issues. So we have to learn to discuss both administrative as well as cultural issues when we are discussing these problems. So most of you are neglecting cultural issues. So what are the cultural challenges in terms of tribe? For example, their understanding of disease, health also has some problems. Disease and health, their understanding of health and disease is a problem. For example, they feel that unless they are sick and unless they are bedridden, they don't go for health care. And most of them believe in shamans and traditional medicines. And they believe that if something is their illness, and they believe that illness happens because of violating a taboo or because of religious reasons. So all these issues have to be discussed in terms of cultural mechanisms, dependence on traditional medicine, traditional healers, understanding of disease. So traditional medicine, traditional healers like shamans, and health and disease, health and religion are connected. So they believe that if they have fallen ill, that is because they have done something wrong, they have violated a taboo, or they have done some evil, because of that they have fallen sick and so on. So this is a cultural reason. And then discuss recommendations. For administrative recommendations, first of course we have to improve infrastructure. Then talk about promoting Ayush, because tribals it is more in line with their medicine. And then learn to integrate or co-opt traditional medicine, traditional healers, and work with them. Here you can quote some case studies. We discussed in class the case study of how in Kalhindi, polio vaccine health workers tried to deliver the vaccine through shamans and not directly by themselves. And increase community or strengthen community health workers. And vaccination or focus on preventive healthcare, preventive medicine. So I shared a handout on health also on the group. If you go and look into that, you'll find all these details. And along with that, preventive medicine, traditional healers, improve infrastructure, and try to generate more funds, especially allot 10% of funds to health data, and create tribal health plan at the overall state level, and also have a tribal health assembly at village, mandal and district levels. Health assemblies and councils at village level, and along with this increase social determinants of health by providing better water, food, and ensuring pollution is reduced. So all these measures, you will find a host of measures in the handout that I shared. So discuss all these measures and say that these are the recommendations as per Kaka committee. So that is how you can talk about health problems. Next, forests and tribes. This is a very easy question. So talk about the traditional relationship between forests and tribes. First, talk about the relationship between them in terms of economic dependence, cultural dependence, and how tribal way of life and tribal identity emerges from forests. So connect this to the famous slogan Jal, Jungle, Jameen, land, forest and water. Economic, you can talk about various livelihoods like hunting, gathering, shifting cultivation. They are forest based. They get their medicine, they get their fuel, fertilizer. Forests provide them with grazing land, ponds with fishing sources, clean drinking water. They also depend on forests for their medical needs, construction materials. So multi-dimensional economic dependence. Culturally also they have dependence on forest. For example, religions like totemism, nature worship, ancestor worship are all around forest, and they also have sacred groves in forest. They also have sacred groves in forest, and they believe that their holy spirits reside in the sacred groves. Along with this, they also believe that forests are the center of their festivals like Sarhul. In Telangana, we have, for example, Medaram Jatara. In fact, in health, you can read a case study. For example, AP government recently started the initiative of setting up tribal districts, and in tribal areas, they also started a medical college. For example, in Paderu, which is a ITDA region, there they began setting up a new medical college with tribal focus. So, tribal medical colleges and training tribal people as doctors, setting up a dedicated medical college for tribal areas, a dedicated specialty hospital for tribal people. All of this must be done to promote and increase the access of healthcare for tribal people. All of that we can write here. So this is their cultural dependence, and how totems, for example, you can talk about Bishnois. For them, black buck is a sacred animal, or if you have Lakra among the Oraon, for them tiger is a totem. So with examples, you can discuss how they have a wide-ranged cultural dependence on forests, and then their whole identity and way of life centers around forests. They derive their identity and their way of life in forest. So this is enough, and briefly trace the history of forest policies. And then say before independence, after independence, how things changed. Before independence, forest was approached more with a revenue maximization mindset. Later on, forests were seen in terms of first serving national development needs, and second, forest was also seen as a mechanism for forest conservation started, and tribals were adversely affected in both these periods. And with the passage of National Forest Policy 1988, for the first time, Government of India recognized tribal rights in forest areas, and these rights were given recognition through the Forest Rights Act 2006. Conclude with that discussion. Next, indebtedness and bonded labor among tribal communities. This is also another major problem among tribes. So here also discuss simple reasons, examples, way forward and measures. And when it comes to reasons for indebtedness, especially discuss how reasons should be of two types. Again, administrative, cultural reasons. Administratively, what are the reasons? For things like lack of financial inclusion, financial literacy, poor training in terms of how to handle money, or we can also talk about absence of organized formal credit, and land alienation, displacement, disruption of traditional livelihoods, migration from outside, or presence of money lenders. All of these are the reasons which are leading to some kind of problems in tribal areas. So things like financial inclusion is a primary issue for this. Next, cultural. Culturally, they are, and because of all of this, they are dependent on money lenders. Dependence on money lenders is another reason. Money lenders are easily available. They give money with very little collateral and no questions asked, but then they take land as security, and the objective is to trap them in debts and over a period of time capture their lands. Culturally, we can talk about how increasing expenditure on marriages, festivals by under the influence of Hindu culture or non-tribal culture. And culturally, these people are very honest and simple, so they don't want to give up on, they feel it is a sin to not pay a debt that your ancestors have taken. So this culture of honesty is being used against them to trap them into debt cycle. So we can also discuss about that in this. And because of all of this, when they are not failing to pay their debts, some of them are being converted into bonded tribes, or they're being taken into bonded labor, and eventually this is giving rise to problems like trafficking, human trafficking and prostitution. And you can talk about some bonded tribes, for example, Kotla in Dehradun, Yanadi in Andhra, Zuang in Odisha, Saharia in MP and Rajasthan. These are some examples of bonded tribes within India. So discuss them. And finally, measures. What can you do to change the situation? We already have measures like SC/ST Prevention of Atrocities Act, so discuss that. And measures like financial inclusion, self-help groups, tribal tribal cooperatives, and training in money like Jan Dhan Yojana. And how do we also provide them with access to formal credit and banking system? And discuss all of that, and reduce expenditure, training in this, and also provide social security measure like health insurance, life insurance, pension. So provide social security. And the larger problem can be addressed through skill development and providing them good livelihood sources so that they don't have to enter into debt trap. And in all of this, we can say we can take NGOs help. So NGOs is something you can write as a point to many topics. Clear? Next is land alienation and displacement. So this is very easy. Most of you would have read so much about land alienation and displacement, and most students wrote very well. I'll just give you some value addition points. So whenever you're talking about land alienation, the answer must have a very simple framework, because most of you wrote just that you didn't discuss all the angles. First talk about the extent or some data, and then ways in which this happens, ways or reasons. Next, impact. This is optional. You can write or you can choose not to write. Then way forward or mitigation measures. And this issue is also discussed very, very extensively in Kaka committee report. In fact, one full chapter has been dedicated to land alienation. So you'll find a lot of data examples there. So here, one famous data that you can write is what Walter Fernandez said. According to Walter Fernandez, 47% of all displaced since independence have been tribals. It's a very famous data. You cannot miss it. Then another study by Kamal K. Mishra. This study shows that 85% of all land alienation has happened because of indebtedness. So you can use this data in the previous question also, that a major reason for land alienation among tribal people is debt trap or being indebtedness. And then you can talk about, when you're discussing impact, here there is a model called by Michael Cernia. Michael Cernia, he said, he gave a 8-fold risk model. Michael Cernia gave an 8-fold risk model for how land alienation can create adverse things for tribal people. It makes them landless, jobless, homeless, loss of social identity, loss of CPR. CPR means community pool resources. CPR means community pool resources like grazing lands, ponds, fishing ponds, common areas. So these are lost. So in this way, he creates loss of identity, and all of this leads to adverse integration. Tribes join the mainstream at a lower level as dispossessed people. Adverse integration and dispossession. Use these words. Adverse integration with the mainstream. That is the impact of land alienation on people. And then discuss the different ways in which this happens. Here also, Kaka committee gave many ways in which it happens. Like first is of course for development projects. Then land acquisition by government using its powers of eminent domain. Then problems in land records. Land records are manipulated, or land records fail to recognize the community ownership of land by tribals. Sometimes it happens because of debt bondage, conflict, like Naxalism, insurgency can also lead to land alienation, or migration of tribals, or to marriage. Non-tribals marrying tribal women just for the sake of acquiring their land. So these are the different ways in which land alienation. Now climate change is another reason for land alienation, or desertification is another reason for land alienation. So you can write all these different reasons for land alienation. And then discuss finally what can be done. Way forward. Again here I shared the handout which has lot of extensive measures given by Kaka committee about how we can handle this particular problem. For example, he says land acquisition should be last resort option. It should be seen as a last resort option, and then even then you should minimize. First avoid. If you can't avoid, then minimize how much land you want to take. Then before acquiring land, you hold Gram Sabha meeting. Hold a Gram Sabha meeting, grant them land rights. Hold a Gram Sabha meeting and you grant them land rights first under FRA, and then you take land. Don't take land without giving them their rights. And after that, if still you must do land acquisition, do it by giving land for land, compensation, as per Land Acquisition Act 2013 and resettle them as a community in the same place. And follow T&C Singh formula, that is, don't just give them land and money and compensation, give them job. That is, make them partners in development process. And finally, you can look at many alternative models. Alternative models like land pooling, land leasing, benefit sharing or equity sharing. That is, you give a share of equity in the project to those who gave land so that they get regular income through dividends. So all this can be discussed. Right? So it's a very classic traditional topic. Next, 7th, education. Again, very similar. First, data. Then reasons. And then solutions or way forward. That's it. Very simple and easy. Under data, you can use once again the data from census 2011, which is the most reliable data for now in the absence of latest census data. So according to this, tribal literacy is 49%. Among them, male literacy is 69, female literacy is 79, and this is much below the national average of 73 or 74%, where the national average is 73-74%. Here, the literacy level is just 59%. So just discuss the data and then talk about reasons. Once again, when you talk about reasons, you have administrative and cultural reasons. Both must be discussed. Some kind of administrative reasons, and then you also discuss some cultural reasons. Administrative, you have many things like, for example, lack of enough schools, teacher-pupil ratio is not up to the mark, classrooms, toilets, textbooks. Sometimes you can have violence in school, violence or sexual harassment of girls. These are some of the administrative issues. Next, cultural issues. Culturally, what are the issues? First, language. Most of the time, schools use the language of English or Hindi, which is English Hindi, or the regional language like Telugu. So language is a major issue. Curriculum. Curriculum is all science. It's a curriculum that is designed for the mainstream. So the curriculum itself is very much outdated and not relevant for tribal people. Next, the whole pedagogy, teaching method is also not relevant because they are taught in traditional classroom based, but tribal students, tribal children are used to learning while doing. That is, they are used to activity based learning. But the present model of pedagogy doesn't permit that. So passive learning is something they don't find interesting. And the curriculum also treats them negatively, where tribals are portrayed as barbaric, uncivilized people in the stories, textbooks, and in the curriculum. So these are some cultural factors behind low issues. And because of all of this, what do you have? You have high dropout rate, poor learning outcomes, low GER for higher education. Though primary education we have high gross enrollment ratio, for higher education the gross enrollment ratio is very, very less. So these are some issue. And gender disparity. How do you solve this? Again, I shared the handout which has a lot of recommendations by Kaka committee that you can use to promote them. Increase classrooms, use residential schools, and schools can be managed by tribal self-help groups so that there is more sensitivity, and have more tribal teachers, train more tribal teachers, and have more teacher training institutes in tribal areas. Set up more teacher training institutes in tribal areas, teach them in their mother tongue. Here you can take the case study of in Odisha, how they've introduced mirror image textbooks. This is a very useful case study. In many tribal areas, they are using mirror image textbooks to improve learning outcomes for children. And curriculum, make the curriculum more tribal friendly, reform it, and focus on sports, because tribals are good at sports, and biological sciences or biological and natural sciences, because they like more of biological and natural sciences than physical and art sciences and arts. And give them scholarships, create special coaching centers for competitive exams, and employment exchanges. So all of these ideas you can write, and we can also say that some of the provisions are also link all of this to NEP 2020, which says that education must be in mother tongue at primary level, and NEP also promotes activity-based learning, which is what tribals are trying to achieve. So discuss all this. Next is cultural features of tribes. Some of you faced problem here while in writing cultural features of tribes. So I shared a handout with lot of content. So if you see in this handout, there is a discussion on Arunachal culture, Nagaland culture, Manipur culture, Mizoram culture, state-wise culture. So you can have two ways to write this answer. One is describe state-wise, like in the handout. Second is feature-wise. So talk about first, what are their different economic systems? Horticulture, agricultural, pastoral, summer hunting, gathering. Next, what's their languages like? What kind of marriage systems they follow? What's their family like? Go follow syllabus here. Kinship, what kind of kinship relations they have? Highlight matrilineal societies like Garo and Kasi. And what is the kind of political systems they have? Here talk about negatives also. For example, headhunting, violent culture among Garos and Nagas, and having political councils, village-based councils for resolving disputes, for managing common property. And then religious beliefs, what kind of religious beliefs they have? Animism, animatism, ancestor worship. Finally, now a lot of them are coming under Christianity, especially in Meghalaya, Nagaland and Mizoram. Whereas in Manipur, the impact of Hinduism is more visible in Manipur and Assam. And in Arunachal, you have Buddhism. So describe the religious footprint and talk about special institutions like youth dormitories, which you find among some tribal sections. And any tribal festivals like Hornbill Festival, tribal festivals that you see in Northeast. You can also add things like their food, dress, status of women. Such cultural features we can add. So you have a lot of content here to discuss and write. So please use this content to answer this question on cultural features of tribes in Northeast India. Next is we'll come to a 9th question in a bit. We'll first discuss 10th question because 10th is much more direct. 9th is a little difficult question. Ideally, I gave this question just to disturb you. And ideally, you should not be avoiding this kind of question in the mains examination in choice, because to write this question is very, very difficult and challenging because the content itself is is not linear and straightforward. In fact, to get the content for this, you must read this book. I'll come to 9th question anyway. First, we'll discuss 10th question because it's straightforward. This is Forest Rights Act 2006. There is 10th question. Once again, please, before you start writing, think of framework for the question. If you think of framework, then you will be able to organize your content better. Because what I feel is a lot of you know the points, but somehow you are not able to write them in the exam. It's not like you don't know and you're not writing. You know, but you're still not writing because you don't know that you must write them. That's a big tragedy. To avoid that blunder, first discuss background. That is relationship between. Here you can borrow some of the content that we wrote for question number 4, forests and tribes. So how forests and tribes have a symbiotic relationship. I missed this point earlier. Please use the word symbiotic relationship. That is, for years, tribals took care of forests and in return, forest provided them with all their necessities. So it was a very good and well established symbiotic relationship between tribes and forests. So discuss the background. Background like how they had various kinds of dependence, how tribals took care of forests for centuries, and how conservation is built into tribal culture. And they look at forest as mother, and it is also religious. It has huge religious significance, and we can even understand this in concepts like NMS complex and so on. But with the entry of British, commercialization of forests began. Tribal rights in forests were not recognized, and forests were declared as national property. And in the post-independence period, because of development projects and conservation ideas, tribal rights were not given importance, and forests were seen as a resource that must be used for national development. In the British period, the approach was to maximize revenue from forest. In the post-independence period, the approach is to maximize forests for national development. That is the background. And in this context, after decades of marginalization, tribal rights for the first time were recognized in the National Forest Policy of 1988, based on which the FRA Act was formed. So all this is the background. Then discuss the provisions of FRA, and then discuss the challenges in implementation. Finally, discuss the way forward or have some suggestions of how Forest Rights Act can be implemented better. Even here, there is very good analysis by Kaka committee on how we can improve things on the whole for Forest Rights Act. So first, what are the provisions? It recognizes it gives forest rights but to two sets of communities. Who are these two sets of communities? One is other traditional forest dweller. Second is forest dwelling scheduled tribe. So there is one forest dwelling scheduled tribe. Second, we also have something called as OTFD or other traditional forest dwellers. Other traditional forest dwellers are those who have lived up to at least 75 years or 3 generations in forest. Then you have forest dwelling ST. So both these groups are given forest rights, and they are given fodder forest rights. It includes A. Land rights, B. It includes community rights. C. It includes right to conserve and protect the forest. And it also talks about Grama Sabha consent. Grama Sabha consent in case of land acquisition or in case of mining projects. So these are the rights. What are land rights? So for every family, it gives up to 4 hectares of land. Up to, it is not exactly 4 hectares, and this land is can be used but not sold, and it can be inherited but not sold in the market. Community rights over grazing areas, common grounds, sacred groves, fishing tanks, fishing ponds, right to conserve and protect. So this means that tribals can take active part in forest conservation, and Grama Sabha consent, and it also provides a 3-tier mechanism for recognition of forest rights. Starting with Grama Sabha, Mandal or block level committee, and you have a district level committee headed by district collector. So you have a 3-tier mechanism to implement this act and grant forest rights. Then what are the problems despite this? First challenge is claims are rejected and no reasons are given. Sometimes claims accepted, pattas are not given. Without pattas, people don't get ownership. And a lot of times, individual rights, that is land rights, are given, but community rights are not given. Second category of rights. And Grama Sabha is not taken seriously, or Grama Sabha consent is forged, it is faked, and all that. Next, it is being violated but by using the exemption. There is only one exemption for Forest Rights Act, that is exemption under Wildlife Protection Act. If a region is declared as critical wildlife habitat, then in that area you can't claim forest rights. So they are just declaring areas as critical wildlife habitat or critical tiger habitat. Just exclude those areas from being exclude those areas from coming under this jurisdiction. Next, joint forest management committees are being formed, and forest rights consent is being taken from joint forest management committees instead of Gram Sabha. So JFM committees are being seen as a surrogates to this. Next, women's rights are being ignored. They are not given seriously. 7. In this act, PVTGs are given special rights called as habitat rights, and there is no clarity and over what these habitat rights are, and many PVTGs are suffering from lack of forest rights despite the recognition. And here there is a case study by Kutia Kons. For Kutia Kon tribe, thanks to the efforts of an NGO, they could get habitat rights because some NGOs helped identify what exactly is their habitat and how this habitat must be defined. They identified the habitat and they said in this area these people must be given rights. So these are the major issues in implementation of the act. And whenever you discuss Forest Rights Act, say because of all these issues, some tribal movements have come up, such as the Niyamgiri movement, and the movement went all the way to Supreme Court, where Supreme Court said Grama Sabha's consent is mandatory for taking land in development projects. And Niyamgiri judgment of Supreme Court is one of the major development in the history of Forest Rights Act. And then suggest some remedies or way forward to make the Forest Rights Act better. That is, improve awareness and strengthen Grama Sabha, and use NGOs help and activists, social activists help to make sure these provisions are implemented in letter and spirit. The next question is a very tricky question. So this issue comes from there is this book, State, Society and Tribes. In this book, there is an article. This is a research article called as Tribes as Indigenous People. So, Virginius Kaka wrote a famous article called as Tribes as Indigenous People some 2 decades ago. So, based on that article, once in a while they are asking this question, whether tribes are indigenous in tribe. The word tribe, does it mean the same as the term indigenous? So, it is based on that research paper, and if you see, the whole argument doesn't have a lot of clarity. Even if you go and read the paper is trying to put some argument forward, but there is no logical structure to it. Hence, I would suggest if a question like this comes, try to leave it in choice. But still, if you want to write, I will give you an overview and try to stick to that overview. So, the whole issue comes with what is indigenous. Indigenous people are first defined by ILO Convention 107, and the definition has been revised once again in ILO Convention 169. So, these ILO conventions have given a global recognition to people who are called as indigenous people. Who are these indigenous people? These are people, to identify them, the ILO Convention 169 has given 2 criteria. These are people who have lived where they are living, lived in that area before colonization and conquest. That is, before migrations happened and before colonial rule happened, before that they must be living there. That is one criteria. Second criteria is they govern their lives in terms of their own social, economic, cultural means. So, having a special culture and living before colonization, this is the criteria. And when defining this, ILO had in mind the New World situation, that is North America. How is North America different? There, some people lived. So, if you take North America, here some people lived traditionally, and then after 16th or 17th century, until then nobody disturbed them, people were living on their own. After that, from Europe, some people came, conquered them and slowly pushed the people to the margins and began to dominate them. So, in that context, this is a very clear-cut definition. But in India, it is problematic. And indigenous people definition, if you call somebody as indigenous people, it gives them special rights and privileges. They become like a globally recognized category. By calling them as indigenous people, we are also making them not just as a cultural category, but we are making them as a political category, by virtue of which they can get some global rights like human rights. Indigenous people are eligible for special rights. This is the basic background. Now the question is, are tribes in India, people who we call as tribes, can they be called as indigenous people or not? Here you can write in terms of arguments for and arguments. You can write arguments against this and arguments for this. So first, arguments for why we should call tribes as indigenous, because after all, tribes traditionally have been defined as those who live outside Hindu civilization. Because nothing, in case of India, there is no conceptual clarity for who is a tribe. Tribes are those, how is Naga, Jarawa, Onge, Chenchu, Santal, all of them are tribes, because these are considered as people who live outside the Hindu civilization and people who live as per their traditional culture, their traditional way of life. So, since that is the way in which tribes have been identified in India, so tribe actually means indigenous people. So there is going by second criteria, that is tribes in India are indigenous people because they live in terms of their own social, economic and cultural means outside rest of the civilization. But some others say no, this is not true, because to be called as tribes you must be subject to colonization and conquest, and tribes must also be earliest inhabitants. The tribes must also be earliest inhabitants of the place in which they are living. Can this be said? Are tribes in India earliest inhabitants or not? This is very, very problematic. Why? Because to identify who is indigenous, generally we take Aryan migration as the breaking point. That is, whoever was before Aryan migration is considered indigenous, and whoever is after that is taken as outside. But if you see, many tribal people who came to India, who are now called as tribes, they came to India after Aryan migration. So if you take Nagas entered India around 500 BC. If you take Mizos, they came to India in 17th century only. If you take Kukis, even after, they came in like 18th century. So these people came only recently. Can you now call them indigenous is the question. This is one issue. Second, some are indigenous to India, but not these indigenous to area where they live. Take for example Santals. If you consider India as a whole, Santals are indigenous. But if you take Santals in Assam or Santals in Bengal, then they have gone there only recently. But Santals in Jharkhand, here they are indigenous. But in Assam, they have been taken there as workers only in the last 200 years. So that is another problem. Next, some of the tribal groups are part of the Indo-Aryan language. Some who are called as tribes speak Indo-Aryan language, that is, they belong to Aryan folk, like Bhils. But we are saying these people must have come to India before Aryan migration. But if you see, Bhils are people who speak Indo-Aryan language. So can you still call them tribals? Second, the other issue is, we said colonization and conquest. We said colonization and conquest. But the question is, people who we are calling tribes, did they experience colonization and conquest only after British or before British also? Because after British, the whole of India went through colonization, not just tribes, which means the whole of India was to be called as indigenous. And or did tribes, people we call as tribes, did they experience colonization even before British came to India? We don't know. Because many believe that before British came to India, tribes did not really go through subjugation. Before British, there was coexistence of tribal people, people who we call as tribes and people who we call as non-tribes. They were in coexistence. It's not like the caste society people were exploiting and dominating tribal people. So the exploitation happened only after independence. Only after British came to India. I'm sorry. But the exploitation is not just restricted to tribals. It is experienced by all of India. So does that mean all of India must be called as tribal? And if you go by indigenous, if you go by criteria like earliest inhabitants, then what happens? Tamils are earliest inhabitants to where they live. Bengalis are earliest inhabitants to where they live. Marathas are earliest inhabitants to where they live. Should we also call them indigenous people? So this is the problem. So finally what we can see is that Tribe, as we use it, is one set of people, but indigenous is another category. And some of the tribal societies are indigenous, like for example, Jarawa, Onge, Chenchu, they all come under indigenous category, but some others who we call as tribes, should we call them as indigenous is a big question. And some who come under indigenous may not be tribal. So that is why the issue is, in India, the term indigenous, when applied to people who we call as tribe, it gives rise to many complexities and many problems. And that is why tribals in India today, instead of complicating things, they have embraced the word Adivasi to identify themselves. And using this Adivasi, they are trying to make political demands on the state. So as you can see, the whole topic is a little complicated and not so logically structured. Hence, I would suggest, if you can leave this question choice, please try to leave it. But if you must write because of other limitations and constraints, then you can discuss about what is indigenous people, how it is defined, arguments for, arguments against, and conclude with the term Adivasi. Clear? So with that, we bring this test discussion to a closure. We'll again meet next week and discuss test 11 and 12. Thank you.